Tariffs taking effect today. The auto sector accounts for 5.3% of GDP and is the fifth largest export sector in the country, accounting for 18% of the country's total exports. Last year alone, the sector exported 35 billion rands worth of cars to the United States market. The agricultural sector stands to be at an immediate disadvantage as some of its competitors like Peru and Chile are subject to a lower tariff of 10%. According to agricultural economist Wandile Sihlobo, the most exposed agricultural industries include ostrich products, table grapes, citrus, nuts and wines. This tariff comes into effect after these sectors have enjoyed more than 2 decades of duty-free access to the United States market under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA. But what purpose do tariffs actually serve?
Tariffs are usually introduced when countries want to protect their local industry in relation to imports of that same good into their country. In other words, they want to try and make their own homemade goods as cheap as possible relative to potential imports, so that people will buy the local goods and so that will generate employment within the country itself.
And this is the crux of what President Donald Trump has indicated he wants to achieve in order to supposedly make America great again. This mechanism will likely have the effect of reducing U.S. demand for certain goods over the long term, while at the same time enabling the U.S. government to make a mint from the tariff charges, which ties in with the administration's push to reduce taxes in its domestic economy, while Trump is also pushing for foreign companies to invest in America instead of their own economies.
President Trump has professed that he is desperate to try and resuscitate American manufacturing industry, and that has been gradually eroded by cheap import, whose impact has been gradually eroded by cheap imports, especially from China over the last few decades. And he's doing that by imposing a surcharge on goods that are imported into the United States.
Meanwhile, through the auspices of the Department of Trade and Industry, the government has been trying to engage with U.S. officials to work on getting a better trade deal than the 30% import duty imposed by Trump. The Minister Parkstow says the U.S. government has not to date given a response to a framework deal proposed by the South African government during President Ramaphosa's trip to the White House.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what happens when your government picks a fight with the most powerful military in the world? What happens when South Africa's army, our so-called defense force, chooses Russia and China over our biggest trading partner? Well, I'll give you the short answer. You get tariffs, you get diplomatic silence, and maybe, just maybe, you get caught trying to secretly send weapons under the radar. This is the full story behind the SA-US military fallout, the lies your government told you, and how a diplomatic no-show just cost us billions of dollars. Let's start off with the real state of the South African army. Now, let's be honest, the South African National Defence Force isn't a fearsome war machine. We've got leaking barracks, unpaid soldiers, and more generals than working tanks. And yet this same ragtag army decided it was smart to host military drills with China and Russia during an active war with Ukraine. Oh, and the drills held right as, US State Secretary and Marco Rubio, well, rather, I mean, Anthony Blinken, the previous one, was trying to keep us in AGOA. For now, we'll be removed from AGOA. A trade deal that keeps thousands of South Africans employed, to be quite honest. The Americans took that personally. Now enters Lady R. If you remember, the former American ambassador to South Africa, His Excellency Ruben Brigitte, spoke about Lady R, the smoking gun, right? Which happened, well, which docked in Simonstown. Now, Lady R, the mysterious Russian ship that quietly docked in our naval base under cover of night, no customs, no transparency, just forklifts moving crates in and out while the world watched. The US ambassador, the former US ambassador himself, accused us of loading weapons bound for Russia. The government, as always, denied everything, as they usually do, but here's the twist. Independent experts confirmed the cargo. US intelligence backed it, and Ramaphosa's own panel admitted something was off. Then Ramaphosa's damage control, had to cool things down. Ramaphosa announced a special envoy, Jonas, to fly to Washington and fix relations. And this was on the back of Ibrahim Rasool, you didn't hear that, Ibrahim Rasool being removed from his, being rather declared, being removed by Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, so he was removed based on his comments that he made, there is the word I was looking for. He was declared persona non grata. I was looking for it in my head, hence I was a bit stuck there. He was declared persona non grata. He was removed by, the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So came in Jonas, he was meant to smooth things over with Congress, the White House, and US business leaders. And, guess what happened, It's August 2025, and Jonas still hasn't set foot in the United States of America. Now, the diplomatic no-show, according to our Minister of Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola, Jonas hasn't traveled to the US even once. Not for lack of trying, but because allegedly he's still preparing. As if I believe that. What is he doing? You will wonder. Studying maps? Reading a Wikipedia page on Washington, D.C.? Well, meanwhile, South Africa is bleeding trade deals and political credibility. We have lost PEPFAR. We are going to lose AGOA. And we've got tariffs that have kicked in. South Africa, we're in for a tough ride. You will know that certain industries in South Africa currently have been sending their exports to different countries, and then they will dock out of those harbors from different countries, then go to the US. But the trick with using that method to try and run away from tariffs is it takes more time, and time is money. So Ramaphosa, Pupol Ramaphosa, wherever you are, big nose president, know that you're costing South Africans a fortune. Now, who can forget that the DA blew the whistle on this? Emma Powell spoke in Parliament. Emma Powell from the DA went public claiming Jonas didn't even have a visa. And worse, that qualified diplomats were being blocked because they were white, imagine, or didn't align with ANC ideology. Now, let's take a pause here. People were blocked because they were white. You can't make this up. You really can't. There seems to be very little thought over international relations and more on cheap pride when it comes to the ANC. She also exposed how South Africa had no ambassador in Washington. Meaning for close to 6 months, we've had no formal diplomatic presence in the US. The ANC responded the way it always does, by accusing her of disinformation. and threatening to involve the intelligence services. As usual, threaten the truth. Meanwhile, the US strikes back, While we were fighting each other in Parliament, the US was moving on. Last week, they dropped a bomb, 30% tariffs on South African exports, one of the harshest penalties on any AGOA country. Why, you might ask? Because we've broken Uncle Sam's trust. We promised neutrality but sided with Russia. We promised diplomacy but sent no one. And we promised trade talks but ghosted our biggest partner. And well, it seems like Iran will be the next biggest partner when it comes to our international relations. Now, here comes the economic fallout. So, economists are warning this could shrink our GDP by about 0.2%. That may sound small, but it's massive, potentially wiping out over 100,000 jobs in mining, agriculture, and manufacturing. US firms are already pulling back from South Africa. Meanwhile, BRICS countries, the ones we suck up to, we are the useful idiots. They are buying less from us than ever before, if you didn't know. The dream of alternative allies is officially dead. Dead on arrival, if you might ask me. Now, Ramaphosa's rescue plan, spoiler alert, it's not working. Now, Ramaphosa's response is a market diversification package. Let's try to sell to the EU and pretend this never happened. 90 billion rand in green funding from Brussels is being hyped as our way out, but EU support doesn't replace American investment, military partnerships, or AGOA privileges. We're not diversifying, we're just panicking. Now, our military relations are in freefall. Remember how this started. Military deals, arms deals. Now even our military relations with the US are deteriorating. Joint operations have been cut back, intelligence sharing paused, and whispers in Washington suggest Congress is lobbying to place South Africa on a hostile actor watch list. Imagine that. ANC arrogance got us blacklisted as a security risk. Now, we were once America's ally. Post-apartheid, South Africa was the darling of the West. Now we're accused of arming Russia, ghosting Washington, and failing at diplomacy, all because this government can't be honest and can't stop playing global politics like it's a backyard gassy fight. You don't pick fights with superpowers, I warn you, especially not when your own house is burning. If you're tired of the ANC lies and economic destruction, make some noise, share this video, like, comment, as well as consider subscribing. The world needs to know how far we've fallen and how close we are to the edge. Don't forget, you can sign up for membership. It's as cheap as 20 Rand. Or you can buy me a coffee by sending a super chat in the comments below. This has been 10 Minutes with Kuhle. I've been your host, Kuhle Maseko. Till next time, stay safe, stay blessed. Amen.
Well, potentially seismic changes for the US-South Africa relationship. This bill is recommending a comprehensive review of the bilateral relationship and accusing South Africa of brazenly abandoning the relationship with the US and aligning with terrorist organizations. It was suggested by Congressman Ronnie Jackson, who celebrated Tuesday's victory of it passing through the committee hearing by saying the days of allowing our so-called allies to walk all over us are over. The US government could potentially determine if senior government officials and ANC leaders in South Africa have been involved in corruption and human rights abuses. And if they determine so, they would then impose sanctions on certain individuals, and that would include travel bans and asset freezes. At heart, really, the US is unhappy that South Africa has taken Israel to the International Criminal Court over war crimes and accused it of genocide for its involvement in Gaza. The US is also angry that South Africa really is siding with the Palestinian people against the US ally Israel. They're also saying that South Africa has undermined US national security interests. They've given the example of carrying out joint military drills with Russia. Well, at Tuesday's hearing, Brian Mast, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he said in support of the bill that this was not about severing ties with South Africa, but rather resetting expectations that the US has. Democrats, though, pushed back. Gregory Meeks said that President Trump had disproportionately targeted South Africa and was trying to embarrass President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, it still has a way to go. Tuesday's hearing was called a committee markup. It was in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. They voted to move it forward, which means at some point the full House of Representatives will vote on this. It's unclear when it will happen. They're now on recess until September. If it's approved by the House, it'll move on to the Senate and land on the president's desk for approval. And remember, Republicans hold a slim majority in both the House and the Senate. The very fact, though, really, that this is even being considered could suggest a monumental shift in the way that the US deals with South Africa, a long-term ally. That relationship with this could change dramatically. Nick Harper, SABC News, Washington.